Hey crew, it's Ben, and I'm back with another Bible study. Today we are going to be back into 2 Samuel. But before we begin, if you are new here, if you just happen to stumble across the channel, I hold some very unconventional views, and therefore I am holding a very unconventional Bible study. So if you are not searching for more than what you already know, this is probably not the place for you. But if you have been here, or if you are going along, I suggest that you start in Genesis because it is easier to keep up. And for everyone else, we are going to dive in. We're going to dive into the text at 2 Samuel 18 with Absalom's death. Uh, we just saw where he pursued David and they fought, and now this. So, and then David reviewed his troops and appointed over them commanders of hundreds and of thousands. He sent out the troops, a third under Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the troops, I will surely march out with you as well. But the people pleaded, You must not go out, for if we have to flee, they will pay no attention to us. Even if half of us die, they will not care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It is better for now if you support us from the city. I will do whatever seems best for you, the king replied. So he stood beside the gate, while all the troops marched out by hundreds and by thousands. Now the king had commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, Treat the young man Absalom gently for my sake. And all the people heard the king's orders to each of the commanders regarding Absalom. And so David's army marched into the field to engage Israel in the battle, which took place in the forest of Ephraim. Let's pop that out real quick. I want to pop it out because when I was doing the read through, this forest seems to be a little bit, like that's one of the sons, but I don't know. It just seems this forest seems a little bit strange. Y'all see what I'm talking about when we get to it. But they marched into the field to engage Israel in battle, which took place in the forest, a copse of bushes of Ephraim. All right, so it's just a location within the tribe of Ephraim. Let's see. Let's get back into it. Where are we at? Right there. So David's army marched into the field to engage Israel in the battle, which took place in the forest of Ephraim. There, the people of Israel were defeated by David's servants, and the slaughter was great that day. 20,000 men. The battle spread over the whole countryside, and the forest devoured more people than the sword. Now, there could be some severe obstacles in that place that I am unaware of, but like I'm from Louisiana, and if you're unaware, we have swamplands around here, and I did grow up in swamplands. Like a large part of my childhood was actually playing in the literal swamps, and you can die there certainly. And I mean, you if you've got gear on and you try to swim across a river, you'll probably drown. But like, it's really hard to kill a majority of 20,000 people with a forest unless there's some trickery afoot, right? Like, and by trickery, I mean like supernatural type things, because I do believe in supernatural type things. And it's just really weird that this forest killed the majority. Like, it doesn't give you a specific number, but the forest devoured more people than the sword. And that's the people of Israel, right? This is David's army, who is not Israel, being killing Israel. So David's army, who is not Israel, is killing Israel. David's army, that's not Israel. Okay. And so The forest devoured more people than the sword. And it's also interesting because what happens right here. Now, Absalom was riding on his mule when he met the servants of David. And as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's head was caught fast in the tree. The mule under him kept going so that he was suspended in midair. And when one of the men saw this, he told Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." "You just saw him," Joab exclaimed. "Why did you not strike him to the ground right there? I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt." The man replied, "Even if 1,000 shekels of silver were weighed out into my hands, I would not raise my hand against the son of the king. For we heard the king command you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. If I had jeopardized my own life, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have abandoned me." But Joab declared, "I'm not going to wait like this with you." And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 young men who carried Joab's armor surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. There's a lot right there. There's a lot right there. Joab comes from over around Hebron. And we have talked extensively about Hebron being one of those places of power that attracts certain entities. And these entities have command of facilities that we don't. In my conspiratorial mind, right? In my estimation, these angels that we see, Joab might even be one of them. I don't know. I don't have enough information to say that as conclusively as I say some of the other things I do. And I get pretty wild in here if you've been paying attention. And so the things that I believe, I believe that these entities can do things. And I believe that different entities have different controls and different things that they can do. It seems to be consistent with this story and other stories from other places. So this forest situation and this tree situation are very interesting to me, because I do believe that there are supernatural powers, and that you can command a tree to die, or you can command a mountain to be cast into the sea, but you can wither a fig tree, right? And so you can control at least that much of it. Maybe you can control growth some, because there is some evidence of that working. But what if you could actually literally control the trees and literally do something with the forest where it would kill more people than the sword? Because they pursued them into the forest, and their army was fine. And I don't know about you, but I've been horseback riding. And if you are moving at a fairly good pace and anything strikes you while you are horseback riding, it is a significant blow. And if you were to somehow, the only way this is possible, if he's in full Bushido gear, right? Full medieval knight type gear with a full helmet and shoulders and chest and everything in, because if you hit the fork of a tree at a trot on a horse, you're probably already dead. If it hits where your head is going to get caught in the fork of a tree, your head is probably going to sever at a trot. That's probably what's going to happen. That is significantly more than having a rope on your neck and dropping through a dead drop of 3 feet. Significantly more. And so, if your head stays attached, there is very, very little likelihood that you're going to remain alive. But maybe there was a little bit more to Absalom too, because we talked about that and how David's lineage comes from Gaza. There is some lineage there, and then we have a repeated pattern of this particular hue being significant, right? This ruddy child, and Moses was a ruddy dude. And like, there's other proofs throughout. And maybe that is a distinctive marking of some sort. Now, I'm not saying that all red-headed people are like that or all albinos are like that, because I really do think that this is more of an albinism trait type thing than I do a ginger type thing. I could be wrong, but it seems like from this text, Absalom was a little bit different, to say the least. He was very handsome, right? Very compelling to look at. And that is one of the traits of some of these extra peoples. And so maybe that part of David's bloodline came out. And that is why he was so particularly attached to this particular child. Now, I didn't go back and look and see which wife it was from. I think this is his firstborn, so it would be from his first wife. And she might have even been from Israel, like either Judah or Israel. She might have been from there, but like a lot of his wives were from outside, including Solomon's. And it may be that the reason he stayed alive in this tree was because he was more than, right? Had a little bit extra. He was maybe gigantic, or one of the men of valor, one of those great men of valor that we hear about, those men of old. Maybe that's why. But also, Joab, who is, by all accounts, quite proficient with the martial arts. He knows how to use a spear, right? He takes 3 spears and thrusts them through the heart of Absalom while he was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 men, young men, who carried Joab's armor, surrounded Absalom, struck him, and killed him. So 3 spears through the heart didn't do it. Now, you could say that this is a sharing the blame. Most likely, the response would have been from David. It's not, but most likely the response would have been from David to kill everybody involved, because that's just how his non-impulse controlling self would react to things. But that is a lot of effort to kill a man. Like, it takes a lot of effort to do that. Don't get me wrong. On the 101, it takes a lot of effort to do that. But this dude is in a tree, hanging by his throat, right? Or by his head. And this proficient person takes 3 spears and jabs them through his heart. And that doesn't kill him. So 10 people come around and they all strike him and kill him. And then Joab blew the ram's horn, and the troops broke off their pursuit of Israel because Joab had restrained them. They took Absalom and cast him into a large pit in the forest and piled a huge mound of stones over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled, each to his home. And during his lifetime, Absalom had set up for himself a pillar in the king's valley. For he had said, I have no son to preserve the memory of my name. So he gave the pillar his name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. I'm going to call bull spit on that particular section, because this is a self-absorbed man. Yes, absolutely, but he was young. He had time for a son, right? He was sleeping with his father's 10 wives on the roof. And Who knows how many other? He was a handsome young man. There was definitely a chance, unless there was something different, that he was going to have a kid, right, who would be able to do this. I think totally bull spitting, like totally pulling it out of my yeah. I think David did it. If there was a monument, I think David put it up and gave Absalom credit. And again, the speculation. But that's based off of this. And then Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, "Please let me run and tell the king the good news that the Lord has avenged him of his enemies." But Joab replied, "You are not the man to take good news today. You may do it another day, but you must not do so today, because the king's son is dead." So Joab said to a Cushite, "Go tell the king what you have seen," because Joab's army is mercenaries, right? It's not Israelis. "Go tell the king what you have seen." And the Cushite bowed to Joab and took off running. Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, however, persisted and said to Joab, "Regardless of whatever may happen, please let me also run behind the Cushite." "My son," Joab replied, "why do you want to run, since you will not receive a reward?" "No matter what, I want to run," he replied. "Then run," he said. Joab told him. And so Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and outran the Cushite. Now, David was sitting between two gates when the watchman went up to the roof by the gateway by the wall, looked out, and saw a man running alone. So he called out and told the king. "If he is alone," the king replied, "he bears good news." And as the first runner drew near, the watchman saw another man running, and he called out to the gatekeeper, "Look, another man is running alone. This one also brings good news," said the king. And the watchman said, "The first man appears to me to be running like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok." "This is a good man," said the king. "He comes with good news." And then Ahimaaz called out to the king, "All is well." And he bowed face down before the king, and he continued, "Blessed be the Lord your God. He has delivered up the men who raised their hands against the Lord, the king." And the king asked, "Is the young man Absalom all right?" And Ahimaaz replied, "When Joab sent the king's servant and your servant, I saw a great tumult, but I do not know what it was." "Move aside," said the king, "and stand there." And so he stepped aside. And then the Cushite came up and said, May my lord the king hear the good news. Today the Lord has avenged you of all those who rose up against you." And the king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom all right?" And the Cushite replied, "May what has become of the young man happen to the enemies of my lord the king, and to all who rise up against you to harm you." And the king was shaken, and went up to the gate chamber and wept. And as he walked out, he cried out, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Now, at this point, he's still got quite a few sons. There is a reason, right? And it's not expressed other than that it was handsome. And yeah, well, he was something. It is possible that the tree didn't kill him, right? It is possible that the tree didn't even hold him. It is possible that the forest didn't kill anybody. It is possible that all the bloodshed was done by the swords because the victors write the story. It is possible that the first messenger was sent out before Joab was killed, and the second one, or before Absalom was killed, or the second one was after, and that he was not killed in the heat of battle. Right? It could be that the first report that he gets was actually the first report, that the great tumult had not taken place yet. And then it was reported to Joab, "The king is weeping and mourning over Absalom." And that day's victory was turned into mourning for all the people, because On that day they were told, the king is grieving over his son. So they returned to the city quietly that day, as people steal away in humiliation after fleeing a battle. But the king covered his face and cried out at the top of his voice, "Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, my son." And then Joab went into the house and said to the king, "Today you have disgraced all your servants who have saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters, of your wives and of your concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. For you have made it clear today that the commanders and soldiers mean nothing to you. I know today that if Absalom was alive and all of us was dead, it would please you. Now therefore get up, go out and speak to your servants, for I swear by the Lord that if you do not go out, not a man will remain with you tonight. This will be worse for you than all the adversity that has befallen you from your youth until now." David is a man with almost no impulse control at all. He has shown very few redeeming qualities at all throughout this entire volumes of Samuel, 1st and 2nd. And so the king got up and sat in the gate, and all the people were told, "Behold, the king is sitting in the gate." And so they all came before the king. Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled, each man to his home, and all the people throughout the tribes of Israel were arguing. "The king rescued us from the hands of our enemies and delivered us from the hand of the Philistines, but now he has fled the land because of Absalom. But Absalom, the man we anointed over us, has died in battle. So why do you say nothing about restoring the king?" So the king rescued us from the hand of our enemies and delivers us from the Philistines, but he fled because of Absalom, who we anointed over us, who has now died. So the people of Israel chose their king and were overruled. And the victor writes the story. And then it's interesting that he goes to the gates. And then he was at the city, he goes to the gates, and he's sitting at the gates, and soon he will cross the Jordan to go to the city. So, yeah. He had fled the land, though. Like, he was out of the land, so maybe that's the gates he's sitting at. I think normally when they say this, you imply that it's the gates of Jerusalem or somewhere's important such as that. But at the moment, he is still east of the Jordan. He is not in the promised land at all. And then King David sent this message to Zadok and Abiathar, the priests. "Say to the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to restore the king to his palace, since the talk of all Israel has reached the king at his quarters? You are my brothers, my own flesh and blood. So why should you be the last to restore the king? And say to Amasa, aren't you my flesh and blood? May God punish me and ever so severely, if from this time you are not the commander of my army in place of Joab." And so he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah as though they were one man. And they sent word to the king, "Return you and all your servants." And so the king returned, and when he arrived at the Jordan, the men of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and escort him across the Jordan. Right. We need to remember this name, Amasa, right? This is the guy who is David's flesh and blood. He is the God who David says, "Punish me and ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army in place of Joab." He is also the guy who was in charge of Absalom's army. Absalom started in Judah, right? He went to Hebron, and there he amassed his army. And he achieved whatever he needed to get from there. And so now David is trying to reclaim Judah because Judah is who put him on the throne, right? This land of Judah is very rebellious. They don't really care to have a king. David himself was a thug and a vagabond. He was a mafioso strong-arm who lived in the land of Judah, who preyed upon the land of Judah. And they came to meet him at Gilgal. And if y'all remember, Gilgal is the mound of foreskins. That's the place where they first began the conquest of the Promised Land by giving a sacrifice of blood in a very significant amount. Gilgal is one of those places of power. And people, for some reason, these entities are drawn to certain places. Hebron and Gilgal more than Jerusalem. And then Shimei, son of Gera, a Benjamite from Bahurim, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David, along with 1,000 men of Benjamin, as well as Ziba, the steward of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons and 20 servants. And they rushed down to the Jordan before the king and crossed at the ford to carry over the king's household and do what was good in his sight. And when Shimei, son of Gera, crossed the Jordan, he fell down before the king and said, My lord, do not hold me guilty, and do not remember your servant's wrongdoing on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. May the king not take it to heart, for your servant knows that I have sinned. So here I am today, as the first of all the house of Joseph, to come down to meet my lord the king. But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said, Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed? And David replied, Sons of Zeruiah, what have I to do with you, that you should be my adversaries today? Should any man be put to death in Israel today? Am I not indeed aware that today I am king over Israel? And so the king said to Shimei, You shall not die. And the king swore an oath to him. Let's remember that name too. It's also interesting to note that the king returned. The men of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and escort him. But first, it was the Benjamite, right, who came across and met him first. And then Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson. Ziba was his caretaker, and now Ziba is in charge of all of his land. Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, went down to meet the king. He had not cared for his feet, or trimmed his mustache, or washed his clothes from the day the king had left until the day he returned safely. And he came from Jerusalem to meet the king, who asked him, Mephibosheth, why did you not go with me? My lord the king, he replied, because I am lame. I said, I will have my donkey saddled so that I may ride on it and go with the king. But my servant Ziba deceived me, and he has slandered your servant before my king, before my lord the king. Yet my lord the king is like the angel of God, so do what is good in your eyes. For all who eat, for all the house of my grandfather deserves death from my lord the king, yet you have set your servant among those who eat at your table. What further right, then, do I have to keep appealing to the king? And the king replied, Why say more? I hereby declare that you and Ziba are to divide the land. See how arbitrary he is? And Mephibosheth said to the king, Instead, since my lord the king has safely come to his own house, let Ziba take it all. Now, David has already previously given all the lands of Saul to Mephibosheth. And now Mephibosheth is saying that surely my whole house deserved death at your hands, and that's simply not true. We have covered that extensively already. If anything, David's house was the one that needed to be eradicated, not Saul's. And whether or not it is true Mephibosheth was holding faith or had turned faith or not, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. The grand scheme of things is David is again arbitrary because he got met on the road and he got mad. And low impulse control David does what? He gives away the land that he previously gave to Saul's son so that he could, or grandson, I can't remember, I think that, yeah, but anyway, since he previously gave Saul's land to as restitution for his damaged soul, for the way he assumed the kingship and the way that all went down. But now this whole deserves death, that's not true, right? That's not even David's view of things up to this point. But David just rips the land away and gives it to someone else. And then he comes back and he hears an apology and he's like, okay, well, I'll split it in half. It's arbitrary. Like, that's not justice at all. Now, Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim to cross the Jordan with the king and send him on his way from there. Barzillai was quite old, 80 years of age, and since he was a very wealthy man, he had provided for the king while he stayed at Mahanaim. And the king said to Barzillai, cross over with me, and I will provide for you at my side in Jerusalem. But Barzillai replied, how many years of my life remain, that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I am now 80 years old. Can I discern what is good and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still hear the voice of singing men and women? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord the king? Your servant should go with the king only a short distance past the Jordan. Why should the king repay me with such a reward? Please, let your servant return, that I may die in my own city, near the tomb of my father and mother. But here is your servant Chinnam. Let him cross over with the Lord my king, and do for him what is good in your sight. And the king replied, Chimham will cross over with me, and I will do for him what seems good in your sight, and I will do for you whatever you desire of me. And so all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. And the king kissed Barzillai and blessed him, and Barzillai returned home. And then the king went on to Gilgal, and Chimham crossed over with him, and all the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel escorted the king. And soon all the men of Israel came to the king and asked, why did our brothers, the men of Judah, take you away secretly and bring the king and his household across the Jordan, together with all of David's men? Wait, what? That's not what we just heard. Unless they moved Gilgal. Consistency. Doesn't even matter in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, it really doesn't. But Judah was not the ones that went across the river. They waited in Gilgal. The Benjamites crossed the river. And all the men of Judah replied to the men of Israel, we did this because the king is our relative. Why does this anger you? Have we ever eaten at the king's expense or received anything for ourselves? We have 10 shares in the king, answered the men of Israel. So we have more claim to David than you. Why then do you despise us? Were we not the first to speak of restoring our king? But the men of Judah pressed even harder than the men of Israel. Now, a worthless man named Sheba, son of Bichri, a Benjamite, happened to be there, and he blew the ram's horn and shouted, we have no share in David, no inheritance in Jesse's son. Every man to his tent, O Israel. And so all the men of Israel deserted David to follow Sheba, son of Bichri. But the men of Judah stayed by their king all the way from Jordan to Jerusalem. So At a very minimum, what we have here is again the fracturing of the nation. Like, not even counting Absalom, which could be considered interior civil strife over the kingship in the same line, right? This is a whole separate line taking Israel north, while David in Jerusalem, or David in Judah from Jerusalem south. And when David returned to his palace in Jerusalem, he took the 10 concubines he had left to care for the palace, and he placed them in a house under guard. He provided for them, but he no longer slept with them. They were confined until the day of their death, living as widows. You're such a good dude. David, like, you are a stand-up man. Like, first off, you received a prophecy that your wives were going to be slept with in the view of everybody. And so you left them there. And then your petty ass comes back. And you're like, lock them away. Keep them under guard. Awesome. Awesome representative of God. And then the king said to Amasa, remember Amasa, he was the general in Judah, and he is now in charge instead of Joab. Summon the men of Judah to come to me within 3 days and be here yourself. And so Amasa went to summon Judah, but he took longer than the time allotted him. How long do you think it would take to gather men from the entire south of Israel? And David said to Abishai, now, Sheba the son of Bichri will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, or he will find fortified cities and delude us. So Joab's men, along with the Cherethites and the Pelethites and all the mighty men, marched out of Jerusalem in pursuit of Sheba, son of Bichri. And while they were at the great stone in Gibeon, Amasa joined them. So, while they were en route, this guy shows up with the army that he was gathering in the name of David, as the general in charge. Now, Joab was dressed in military attire, with a dagger strapped to his belt, and as he stepped forward, he slipped the dagger from its sheath. Are you well, my brother? Joab asked Amasa, and with his right hand, Joab grabbed Amasa by the beard to kiss him. And Amasa was not on guard against the dagger in Joab's hand, and Joab stabbed him in the stomach and spilled out his intestines on the ground. And Joab did not need to strike him again, for Amasa was dead. And then Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Sheba, son of Bichri. And one of Joab's young men stood near Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab. But Amasa wallowed in his blood in the middle of the road. And when the man saw that all the troops were stopping there, he dragged the body off of the road and into a field and threw a garment over it. And as soon as Amasa's body was removed from the road, all the men went on with Joab to pursue Sheba of Bichri. Now, it is entirely possible that in some other books there are some clarifying statements that Amasa was leading an insurrection and he was intentionally late, right? He may have accidentally stumbled across them thinking that they were already going to be gone and he was going to go kill David. That's possible. And maybe there's some context in another book. But these are meant to be read separately. And so the context should all be here. That is a major problem with a lot of this, is that if there is context way back here that sets it straight, it should be included. Like right now, without doubts. And so, as this stands, Joab is a traitor to his king. Now, It could be that he was waiting a month. It could be he waited a week. Maybe it only takes a day to gather the people, and 3 days was just being safe. I don't know, but it seems like if you're going to gather an army, it's going to take a little while, and 3 days is really quick. It may be that post events, when the victor is writing the history, that they use the 3 days as a justification for something that Joab took upon himself. Because Joab does have quite a habit of doing that. He's from Hebron. So, and again, another massive betrayal. He grabs him as though to kiss him in friendship and calls him brother and stabs him and then spills his guts on the ground and then leaves him in the road. But Amasa wallowed in his blood in the middle of the road, so he wasn't dead right away. And when the man saw that all the troops were stopping there, he dragged the body off of the road into a field and threw a garment over it. And as soon as Amasa's body was removed from the road, all the men went on with Joab to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. And Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel Beth Maachah, and through the entire region of the Berites, who gathered together and followed him. And Joab's troops came and besieged Sheba in Abel Beth Maachah, and built a siege ramp against the outer rampart of the city. And all the troops with Joab were battering the wall to topple it. A wise woman called out from the city, "Listen, listen. Please tell Joab to come here so that I may speak to him." And when he had come near to her, the woman asked, "Are you Joab?" "I am," he replied. "Listen to the words of your servant," she said. "I am listening," he answered. And then the woman said, "Long ago they used to say, 'Seek counsel at Abel,' and that is how disputes were settled. I am among the peaceable and faithful in Israel, but you are trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why would you swallow up the Lord's inheritance?" "Far be it," Joab declared, "far be it from me to swallow up or destroy. That is not the case, but a man named Sheba, son of Bichri, from the hill country of Ephraim, has lifted up his hand against the king, against David. Deliver him alone, and I will depart from the city." "Look," the woman replied, "his head will be thrown to you over the wall." And then the woman went to all the people with her wise counsel, and they cut off the head of Sheba, son of Bichri, and threw it to Joab. And so he blew the ram's horn, and his men dispersed from the city, each to his own home. And Joab returned to the king in Jerusalem. Now Joab was over the whole army of Israel. Benaniah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Chetherites and the Pelethites. Andoram was in charge of the forced labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was the recorder. Sheva was the scribe, and Zadok and Abiathar were the priests. And Ira the Jairite was David's priest. And that's where we're going to wrap this one up, because the next one starts a whole new section. And so, hopefully, I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and because of those beliefs, I have a tendency to step on toes. And while that is not intentional, I do not apologize. I am merely reading the book in the way that he instructed me to read the book. If you read this through the lens of morality, right, the morals that God gave us, David objectively is not. He is not in any shape a worthy representative of God. He has not tried in the slightest bit to do the right thing at all through this. And so, once upon a time, the morality of the world was conquest. And in the times where that was the reality of the world. The values held by those who conquer were the values that were most important. The man that could go out and slay tens of thousands in the time of conquest was the virtuous man. But looking through the lens, right? The lens of history and the lens of time, David subjectively, was a horrible person. Like, he killed a lot of people. He was petty and arbitrary. He was covetous. He was an adulterer. He was really not a good dude. All the way up to here. Right? We haven't got to any type of redemption as of yet. And if we take it at face value, at what we have read right now so far, without having to interject the need for redemption coming later, if we don't interject that, then we have some serious problems, because Saul was a better servant of God. He at least tried. David doesn't try. David has no impulse control. David sees a woman and takes her, regardless of whose wife it is. That is adultery. That is coveting. He uses the Lord's name to make promises that lead to destruction. That's using the Lord's name in vain. It's not saying a cuss word. And so David is the least example of what a man should be outside of the time of conquest, right? Even down to the fact that his son was trying to kill him and throw him out and take over the kingship, not righteously. He mourned unrighteously for that. And so there's whole levels of how bad David is. And if you take apart from his line comes the redemption of all mankind, which I do. I take that out of that. The only thing ever necessary for you to be forgiven from your sin was to sacrifice your sin. There was never an intermediary needed for you to be forgiven from God. And so if you take out that, then whoever is keeping David in charge, like up to this point, he should have been removed several times over according to the law. And how is God not only going to keep this king in power, but bless this king as his example, as his representative, while he is actively engaging in breaking the commandments? Like, he is actively choosing to break commandments, and God is not deciding to punish him. God is instead increasing his gains. So if this is, if I'm reading this correctly, and David is doing horrible things in the name of God, and God is not correcting him, then God is approving of it. And you can talk about and apologize for the plan, that they needed to have this down here so that, no. If God is right and just and true, if God is right and just and true, if God holds his own commandments, I said it 3 times so you'd pick it up, then David should have been punished much more severely than Saul. And that's where I'm going to leave it. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.